Well, happy Thursday, everybody. How you all doing out there tonight? This is Barbara McCarthy coming to you from Beach Church with our daily Bible study. And today our Bible study is going to be called Spiritual Passion, okay? And we're going to be looking at the Songs of Solomon or the Songs of Songs, whichever you were brought up to call it by, chapters 1 through 4. So basically, just of course, I would get stuck with these love chapters. I thought when I started studying the chapters, I used to have a pastor years and years ago named Pastor Tom, and I remember he did a series on this, and I never heard so much laughing in the church and I'm almost 70. So this is hard stuff for people to find in the middle of the Bible. I'm sure your pastors would agree. So I think really what people focus a lot on in this is they're looking at the love stuff and not about the relationship it points to between us and our Savior, Jesus Christ. So let's look at this a little closer, guys, okay? All right. Okay, then. So I came across a quote from a Rabbi Ajiba. He was an early Jewish commentator, and this is what he had to say about Song of Songs. All the scriptures indeed are holy, but the Song of Songs is the holy of holies. That's really quite a statement for a rabbi to make, isn't it? And then Charles Spurgeon, who, he's another long-standing, very, very respected preacher. He preached 59 sermons on this book of chapter 1 and 2 only, 59 sermons. So I think there must be some good stuff in here, okay? So let's start off with chapter 1, okay? So basically, it powerfully illustrates the love relationship that exists between God and his people and between Jesus Christ and his church. So we see, like I said before, many people avoid this book altogether. And they do warn us in the first chapter, if you're a person that has kind of like out of control sexual type situations, passions, you may want to refrain from reading this. It just says that. It says that in the commentaries I looked at. I don't really understand that, but I guess if people are out of control is what they're saying. Okay. So basically then also, many discuss the songs as a love relationship between God and his people, not between husband and wife. So they use the imagery of husband and wife and marriage and relationship physically, but they really want you to think about what the relationship between Christ and his bride, which is his church, would be. That's what this is all directed at from what I can gather from everything I read, okay? Also, then, it's a collection of snapshots of courting and married life. So for those of you out there that are still single, you may want to read this with some interest. And I think there's a lot of good things I'm going to bring up that are in here that aren't directly related to sexual situations, okay? So basically, then, God uses the marriage relationship to demonstrate the beauty that exists between God and the believer. I just thought that was a beautiful statement, okay? So basically, the Song of Songs is a collection of love poems, and some view it as a celebration of human love and intimacy. Others see it as an allegory for the relationship between God and his people, or even Jesus Christ and the church. So that's really everything I pulled out. Let me see here, of chapter 1, and we'll go to chapter 2 now. So in chapter 2, what's interesting about chapter 2? There's some beautiful, beautiful nature imagery used in this chapter. If many of you went to school when I did, or maybe you're younger than me, but we used to read books back in the day that are now on the can't read list, Well, one of those books was The Grapes of Wrath by one of the best authors that ever lived in our country named John Steinbeck, okay? And they talked about the Rose of Sharon. I think one of the daughters was named the Rose of Sharon. So that was a very, very beautiful flower that they thought highly of, as well as calling his beloved a lily among thorns. That's a nice thing for a guy to say to a girl, isn't it? So maybe we can pay attention here and look maybe at some of the loving things that we could say to each other that we don't. That kind of like doesn't give a lot of romance to our relationship then. And then, so basically then the maiden enjoyed the loving presence of her husband. And basically, the couple were busy complimenting each other in chapter 2. And now she feels like she rests under his protective shade. And, you know, if we think about that for a minute, like what I said before, the protective shade, that the imagery of that with a wife, you know, functioning under her husband. So if we think about this, okay, he gave her, so let me see where I was. Okay. She rests under the protective shade that he brings. But then think about, now, remember I told you about this allegorical imagery. Now think about this. Okay, now, Jesus Christ also brings us a protective shield, doesn't he? Okay, so the imagery is very similar. So we have Jesus Christ bringing us a protective shield, and, you know, that we rest under with him, and he keeps us from harm, okay? So, and again, I told you that, let's see, Jesus Christ meets all of our wants and all who come to him. He gave her shade and fruit. Okay, the guy did. The guy gave the woman shade and fruit. And I think Christ would give us shade and fruit or food if we needed it. We see that all the time in the Bible, don't we? So the man, he said she was like a lily among thorns. Isn't that a beautiful thing? So is my love among the daughters. So basically, like a lily is among thorns, so is my love, the woman, among the daughters. Because in other words, she would stand out, like just like the lily would in the thorns, okay? Okay, so then basically then, that's everything from chapter 2 I gathered. I really like the imagery of nature. I told you that. And that's how he described his love. Okay, then we go to chapter 3, okay? And basically we've got a wedding in chapter 3. Their love was very passionate but pure and restrained. It had become a fountain from which all could taste the sweetness of their joy. Isn't that nice? So their love was so sweet, and it was so honest and sincere. You could taste the sweetness of their joy. I just love the way I thought that was so nice. So basically then the concept of oneness of life and a shared life, that it should exist between husband and wife. Love is the mother of virtue and the father of maturity. Love is the mother of virtue and the father of maturity. The one you love should bring forth your best qualities and make you a better person. And, you know, sometimes we got to think about here who we marry. Like, you know, I had some unfortunate situations in my life, but I married people that were not yoked equally in my Christian walk. And it got me into a lot of trouble. So I just want to say that, you know, look for their best qualities and make sure you are yoked spiritually, or it's not going to work. If God isn't in the middle of it, it won't work, okay? All right, so then I have something else here. So their love, they had the wedding, I said that. Their love had become a fountain from which all could taste the sweetness, okay? And then, and love should bring forth the best qualities in us and make us a better person, right? So that's just, you know, really what I feel. And then also in the commentary, it mentioned that the joy and intimacy of love within a committed marriage covenant. Song of Songs foreshadows Jesus Christ, the bridegroom's relationship with his bride. So we talk about a marriage, that's, you know, that's a committed covenant. It's a covenant relationship when we marry in the church. And basically that foreshadows Jesus Christ being the bridegroom with his church, with the church being his bride. So isn't this interesting? We think this is all about a physical relationship and dating, and look what we're finding out about the relationship that leads us to Jesus Christ, which is what the whole, if you read this Bible right, everything will lead you to Jesus Christ, okay? All right. All right, I think that was everything on there. Okay. All right, and then finally we're going to move to chapter 4, and in chapter 4 we see beauty. no, excuse me, I made a mistake. In chapter 4, he was focused on her, not on himself. Isn't that nice when you love someone? If they show you attention and focus on you, that's a wonderful thing. There's so many people now in marriages, they don't even talk to each other. You know, they sit down at the table with the wife and the kids and or the husband and the kids, and they're on the cell phone. Nobody talks to each other. And really that's not really what, what a covenant marriage looks like, or a consecrated family. So he was focused on her, not on himself, and she could safely yield to this man who cared for her this much, and unselfishly he gave hearty approval to their affirmations of love. So this guy really wanted to marry this girl, didn't he? He was going to do what it takes. The only thing I want to comment on here to encourage us is, let's remember that when we're in a marriage or a committed relationship, based on love and a Christian relationship, just try to remember that we want to give approval to our partner, okay? Our husband, our wife, our engaged person, or whatever. Just remember, you see how we were reading all this in Song of Solomon or Song of Songs? Just remember all this stuff. In those days, they stayed engaged for like a year. So all these things about, what they're talking about here, about, as soon as the marriage contract, I think they called it the ketubah, as soon as that marriage contract went into effect, all the marriage stuff kicks in. They cannot have marital relationships. That's the only thing different. So this whole thing is in the Old Testament, and this poor guy and girl, they got to wait a whole year now to live this out. That must have been hard. I think that's hard. But you don't hear many situations that they found it. I'm sure that there were people that had difficulty, but they don't really talk about a lot of that in the Bible. I'm sure it was there though. Okay, so let me make sure I've covered all my points for you. I tried to pull as much out as I could. So in chapter 4, then, I also wrote down that he emphasized his admiration and love for his beloved, highlighting her physical beauty and the deep connection they shared. Well, that would be really nice for someone to do, right? So then finally, I got some final things, some encouraging summary statements to make. So what did these 4 chapters show us? The Song of Songs is a journey of love, whether it's between the consummated marriage with the husband and the wife, or with Christ and his church, Christ being the bridegroom and his church being the bride. So it's a journey of love in both situations. It affirms the importance of love's timing and the magnitude of mutual desire. So what that's saying is, we have to be careful about our timing and make sure that we've developed mutual feelings by now. But the other thing here that's interesting is when these Jewish people in the Old Testament were married, they really didn't know each other. It was an arranged marriage with the parents, okay? And they couldn't touch each other. They couldn't be alone together. So they're hanging out a whole year like this. And I think that would have been rough. But people had more discipline, I think, in those days. I really do. If you watch The Chosen, you can kind of see what I'm talking about. I think people just lived out their faith much. In some cases, much, more emphatically. Okay, so the mutual desire, importance of love's timing. Marriage is sacred. We need to remember that marriage is sacred. And also, the relationship between the bride and the bridegroom, being Christ, is sacred. Okay, companionship is highly valued. We don't, here I'm alone now, and it's tough. It is tough. And those of you that are blessed to have 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years of marriage, I am so happy for you. It just wasn't meant for some of us, but it was meant for many others. I look at the marriage of our pastor, James Brockway, and his beautiful bride, Selena. They have got one of the best marriages I've ever seen, despite the fact they have 4 children. So, you have to look for good marriages and then talk to those people and see how they walk that path together. Okay, and then also the companionship I talked about, the sanctity of love and spiritual allegories tied to our own relationship with the divine. So I think I stress quite a bit about how this husband and wife thing goes right to the bride and the bridegroom with Christ and his church. Okay, so I think we can be encouraged. We've got a lot of good information here about dating, about relationships, about marriage, about commitment. spiritual aspects of marriage, and but remember, marriage is a sacred covenant that is never to be broken. I broke my vows were broken, but I didn't want that. But it happens to some of us, okay? And don't be so critical on people that it happens to, because it isn't always their fault. So I just want to say, have a great week. Isn't this weather beautiful? This Thursday, it's so nice out. And I don't even think when I started, I told you what I was doing here. I was too excited. So today we covered the Song of Solomon, chapter 1 through 4. And the name of our lesson today was Spiritual Passion. Okay, guys, I'm going to sign off. Hope to see you at Beach Church Sunday at 9 or 11 and breakfast at 10:30. Bye-bye now.